So a really interesting study that I found from a while back now was about the effect of plyometrics on running economy and running performance. The key aim of this study was to investigate whether musculotendinous stiffness could improve running economy and running performance. First of all, we need to sort of know what is musculotendinous stiffness. Musculotendinous stiffness, or MTS, as it's bracketed in the study, is basically a measure of how quickly the muscles can co-contract and then produce force back up through those muscles to release the energy. So let's think of when we look at anyone jumping or running. If you've ever seen anyone such as a sprinter or hurdlers or long jumpers and triple jumpers, if they are jumping continuously, you'll see that they'll hit the ground and very quickly react back off that ground, quite springy, if you like. So it's a measure of springiness. People that have a low level of musculotendinous stiffness tend to hit the ground like they've got lead boots on, very slowly sink and then push back up again. It looks like slow motion jumps. So plyometrics are known as a great tool to try and improve musculotendinous stiffness. They wanted to see in this study whether doing a long protocol of plyometrics would increase running economy, because they know plyometrics improves musculotendinous stiffness. So now they want to know whether or not that improvement in from the plyometrics carries over to a greater running economy and running performance. The study consisted of only 17 male runners. So we can look at this in critical thinking later. Was it a big enough group? However, let's just have a look at what this study managed to produce. They tested musculotendinous stiffness pre and post study, and alongside this they also tested 8 key metrics to see whether or not the plyometrics made a difference on running performance and economy. The key metrics that were measured were maximal isometric force and rate of force development. They're the first two. That was done by an instrumented seated calf raise machine. I'm not going to go too in depth of how each piece or test was done, but that was just done by isometrically done on a calf raise machine, pushing as hard as they can, measuring the maximal isometric force and how quickly they could produce that force. They then did the 5-bound distance and counter movement jump. So how much distance they could cover from 5 bounds and the counter movement jump. The 5 bounds was done single leg unilaterally, if you like, so not broad jumps, just like a bound you'd see with triple jumper doing. And the counter movement jump was done bilaterally, standard counter movement jump. Then they also measured running economy, VO2 max, and lactic threshold. All those 3 metrics were measured by an incremental treadmill test. That was done by running at set periods. I can't remember how long, but it was 8 kilometers, 10 kilometers, and 12 kilometers at those speeds. And they measured the velocities on there, so the contact times of the steps and the strikes, and the how long they would spend on the treadmill, if you like, in between each step. And lastly, the 8th metric that was tested was the 3 kilometer time, probably one of the most specific measures to see whether or not they will have improved because of the musculotendinous stiffness and plyometric program. So how was the experiment and research carried out? They were split into 2 groups. The first group was the experimental group, or E group, and the second group was the control group, C group. The experimental group did 6 weeks of plyometrics, which I will post up here. This ran concurrently along with their normal run program. So their run program didn't change. However, they just implemented a 6-week plyometric program alongside it. The control group, the C group, they changed absolutely nothing, kept the same run program as the experimental group, but just didn't do the plyometrics. The results saw for the control group, no change. So there was no change in any of the 8 metrics, no decrease, no increase, everything stayed the same. However, the experimental group, they saw significant changes across a lot of metrics, 6 of the 8 metrics. I'll go through those now. So the first, isometric maximal force and the rate of force development. The ISO max force was an 11.4% increase, and the rate of force development was 14.1% increase. The 5 pound distance saw a 7.8% increase, and the counter movement jump saw a 13.2% increase. The running economy, which was measured on the treadmill incremental test, that saw a 5.7% increase on the velocity. However, no change for the VO2 max and no change on the lactic threshold, which will be interesting points to talk about in a minute. And lastly, the 3 kilometer time test saw a 2.7% increase, which is one of the most key aspects. So what do these results mean? How do we interpret them? Well, there was no change for the lactic threshold and VO2 max in the experimental group. So this tells us that they managed to improve their 3 kilometer time without having to improve any of the cardiovascular metrics. So how did they improve their 3K time? They improved their 3K time by improving their musculotendinous stiffness, which was done by implementing a plyometric program. Remember, this study, it was set out to see whether or not musculotendinous stiffness would increase running improvement and running economy. The answer from this study is a resounding yes, as the group that didn't do a plyometric program didn't improve their musculotendinous stiffness and therefore didn't improve their 3 kilometer time. So how was it achieved? As you can see from the program that we just put up, it was achieved over a 6-week program. The 6-week program saw an increase in intensity, starting from 60 contacts in week 1, going all the way up to 180 contacts in week 6. So basically the amount of contacts being implemented in that final week, with 3 times the workload. And also the exercises started off with what you'd say is relatively low complexity, going to quite high complexity, or low challenge to high challenge by week 6. So it was definitely a challenging plyometric program that helped them see the improvements. Points worth noting, however, on this, it's always good to have your critical thinking head on, and we're going to do this now. Key points I saw was the control group had a better pre-3 kilometer time than the experimental group. So the experimental group saw increases in their time, whereas the control group didn't. But the control group had a better pre-test time. So the control group saw improvements. Was that because of the musculotendinous stiffness, or was it what we like to call beginner gains? Was it just because they had more room to grow than the control group? It's a good question that made me think, and I did a little bit more research and looked into more studies. I'll put them below. But those studies managed to back up this study in that musculotendinous stiffness does improve running economy. However, you had to go digging to get other studies to have a look whether it correlates with this. So the results do correlate, but it was worth noting that the control group that didn't do any plyometrics actually had a faster 3K time prior to the test. So they, you could argue, had less room to grow than the experimental group. Key takeaways at the end of all this from reading this study. Plyometrics have been shown to be a great and useful tool to improve musculotendinous stiffness, and let's just call that your springiness. The increase in that springiness has been shown now to increase running economy. So what does this mean, running economy? It basically means that you can improve your running times without having to improve certain metrics of cardiovascular fitness. So you don't have to improve your lactic threshold, and you don't have to improve the VO2 max to get a 3 kilometer time improvement. However, if you then did some work alongside plyometrics, increasing the VO2 max and increasing that lactic threshold, you'd be more than likely to see an even greater improvement. So key takeaway from this would be, if you're not doing plyometrics as a distance runner, you should be implementing plyometrics 1 to 2 times weekly to try and improve that springiness or musculotendinous stiffness. This will improve your running economy. Having greater running economy is definitely going to improve those times, as shown in this study. I'm going to put a few links below. Thanks for watching.